The sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s stands as one of the most significant social transformations of the 20th century. It promised to liberate individuals, especially women, from the strict social and sexual codes of the past. The architects of this movement envisioned a world where personal freedom, reproductive choice, and equality would flourish. Decades later, however, the legacy of this revolution is far from settled. A fierce and persistent debate continues to rage over its true consequences. Did it truly empower women and lead to greater happiness, or did it inadvertently create new and unforeseen problems for them? This question remains at the heart of modern cultural discussions. At the forefront of the critical perspective is the conservative commentator Candace Owens. She has boldly argued that the sexual revolution, far from being a victory for women, has actively devalued them and led to a marked decline in their overall happiness. Owens contends that the freedoms granted by the revolution have come at a steep price, leaving women more anxious, less fulfilled, and struggling to form the stable, committed relationships that are foundational to human well-being. Her claims have ignited controversy, forcing both supporters and critics to re-examine the historical narrative and its real-world impact on the lives of women today. This essay will delve into this complex and often emotional debate. We will begin by defining the sexual revolution, exploring its origins and key objectives. Then, we will carefully unpack the different ways one might understand the value of women, a central concept in this discussion. We will present the core arguments put forward by Candace Owens, juxtaposing them with the counter-arguments from feminist thinkers who view the revolution as a monumental step forward for female empowerment. Finally, we will analyze the available data on women's happiness, mental health, and life satisfaction to see what the evidence suggests about the true legacy of this transformative era. The goal is not to declare a simple winner in this cultural war, but to navigate the complexities with a clear and balanced approach. The impact of the sexual revolution is not a simple story of triumph or tragedy. It is a nuanced tale of greater freedoms alongside new and difficult challenges. Understanding both sides of this debate is essential for anyone seeking to comprehend the modern social landscape. By carefully considering the arguments and the evidence, we can gain a more sophisticated appreciation of how these historical changes continue to shape the lives, choices, and happiness of women in the 21st century. The sexual revolution was not a single event but a widespread cultural shift that unfolded primarily during the 1960s and 70s. It emerged from a growing dissatisfaction with the rigid social structures of the post-World War II era. Society at that time was characterized by strict gender roles, where men were expected to be public figures and providers, while women were largely confined to the domestic sphere as wives and mothers. The prevailing morality condemned premarital sex, especially for women, and discussions about sexuality were often considered taboo. This restrictive environment created a fertile ground for a movement that sought to challenge and ultimately dismantle these long-standing norms. A key catalyst for this social upheaval was the introduction of the hormonal birth control pill in 1960. For the first time in history, women had access to a reliable and discreet method of contraception that separated sexual activity from the near certainty of procreation. This technological innovation was revolutionary in itself, granting women unprecedented control over their reproductive lives. It empowered them to delay marriage and childbirth, pursue higher education, and build careers in ways that were previously unimaginable for the vast majority. The pill became a powerful symbol of this new era of personal and sexual autonomy, fundamentally altering the social and economic landscape. The goals of the sexual revolution were intertwined with the broader objectives of second-wave feminism. Activists sought to redefine women's roles in society, demanding not only sexual freedom but also economic and political equality. They fought for the right to open bank accounts, secure loans, and enter professions that had long been dominated by men. The movement challenged the idea that a woman's worth was defined solely by her marital status or her role as a mother. Instead, it promoted a vision of female identity rooted in individual choice, self-determination, and the pursuit of personal fulfillment in all areas of life, both public and private. As a result of these efforts, society underwent profound changes. Traditional attitudes towards sex, marriage, and family began to erode. Divorce rates increased as women gained the financial independence to leave unhappy or abusive relationships. The age of first marriage rose, and cohabitation before marriage became more common and socially acceptable. The revolution opened up new possibilities for women, giving them a greater range of choices in how they lived their lives. However, this period of rapid transformation also created uncertainty and new social pressures, the consequences of which are still being debated and analyzed today. To understand the core of Candace Owens's argument, it is crucial to first unpack the complex and multifaceted concept of a woman's value. This term can be interpreted in several distinct ways, and different sides of the debate often emphasize one meaning over others. Failing to distinguish between these interpretations can lead to confusion and unproductive arguments. The most fundamental type of value is intrinsic worth, which refers to the inherent dignity and importance of every human being, regardless of their gender, actions, or social standing. From this perspective, a person's value is absolute and cannot be diminished by external factors. It is a core tenet of human rights. A second type of value is social value, which relates to a person's contributions to their community and society at large. This can include their role as a parent, a community leader, a professional, or a caregiver. Before the sexual revolution, a woman's social value was often narrowly defined by her success as a wife and mother. Feminist movements have worked to expand this definition, arguing that women contribute value in countless ways, from the boardroom to the laboratory to the political arena. This expanded view suggests that a woman's social value has increased as her opportunities to contribute to society have grown. Economic value is another important dimension. This refers to a person's ability to participate in the economy, earn an income, and achieve financial independence. The sexual revolution and the accompanying feminist movement dramatically increased women's economic value. By breaking down barriers to education and employment, women were able to enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers. They gained the ability to support themselves and their families, reducing their economic dependence on men. This financial autonomy is seen by many as a cornerstone of modern female empowerment and a clear increase in their overall value within a capitalist framework. Finally, there is the concept of sexual market value, which is central to the arguments made by critics like Candace Owens. This term, borrowed from evolutionary psychology and economics, refers to an individual's desirability as a romantic or sexual partner. It is determined by a combination of factors, including physical attractiveness, youth, fertility, and perceived social status. Critics of the sexual revolution argue that by making sex more readily available outside of committed relationships, women inadvertently lowered their sexual market value. This is the specific type of devaluation that Owens and others often highlight in their critiques of modern dating culture. Candace Owens has become a prominent voice arguing that the sexual revolution was, in fact, a detrimental event for women. Her central claim is that the movement, while framed as liberation, ultimately led to a significant decline in female happiness and well-being. She posits that the pursuit of a career-focused, sexually liberated lifestyle has left many women feeling unfulfilled, anxious, and lonely. In her view, the promises of second-wave feminism, that women could have it all by emulating male career paths and sexual patterns, have proven to be an illusion that has caused more harm than good for a large segment of the female population. A key part of Owens's argument is that the revolution devalued women by severing the connection between sex and commitment. She contends that when women were encouraged to engage in casual sex without the expectation of a long-term partnership, they lost a significant source of their leverage in the relational marketplace. Men, she argues, no longer needed to offer marriage or stability to gain sexual intimacy, which in turn made it more difficult for women seeking such commitments to find them. This dynamic, according to Owens, has created a culture where women feel pressured to be sexually available, while simultaneously yearning for the security that has become increasingly elusive. To support her claims, Owens frequently points to data on women's mental and emotional health. She highlights what she describes as a crisis of unhappiness among modern women, evidenced by rising rates of antidepressant use and diagnoses of anxiety and depression. She argues that these trends are not a coincidence, but a direct consequence of a society that has moved away from the traditional family structures that once provided women with a clear sense of purpose and belonging. The freedom to choose any path, she suggests, has paradoxically led to a sense of being lost and disconnected from the biological and social roles that historically provided deep satisfaction. Furthermore, Owens connects this decline in happiness to increases in substance abuse. She often states that women are popping more pills and engaging in more self-destructive behaviors than they did in the pre-revolutionary era of the 1950s. This includes not just prescription medications, but also rising rates of alcohol consumption. For Owens, this is not a sign of liberation but of despair. She interprets these behaviors as coping mechanisms for the deep-seated unhappiness that has resulted from the social and relational instability unleashed by the sexual revolution, painting a picture of a generation of women who are suffering under the guise of freedom. Diving deeper into Candace Owens' perspective, her critique is heavily focused on the dynamics of modern relationships and what she terms the sexual marketplace. She argues that human beings are, biologically wired to form stable pair bonds and create families, a fundamental drive that she believes feminism has tried to ignore or, outthink. According to this view, the sexual revolution created a profound mismatch between women's innate desires for commitment and security and a culture that promotes casual, no-strings-attached encounters. This mismatch, she contends, is a primary source of female unhappiness in the modern era. Owens asserts that the revolution fundamentally altered the bargaining power between men and women. In the past, she explains, a woman's sexual exclusivity was a highly valued asset that she could exchange for a man's long-term commitment, protection, and resources. By encouraging women to give up their goods for free, Owens argues that feminism effectively flooded the market, diminishing the value of what women had to offer. Consequently, men have less incentive to pursue marriage, as they can often get the benefits of sexual intimacy without the responsibilities of a lifelong partnership, leaving many women in a state of perpetual dating anxiety. This framework portrays the modern dating scene as a brutal and often unforgiving marketplace, particularly for women who desire a traditional family structure. Owens suggests that women are now competing with one another in a system that rewards casual behavior while punishing the desire for commitment. She often speaks of a hookup culture that leaves women feeling used, empty, and emotionally damaged. In her narrative, the sexual freedom promised by the revolution has turned into a form of social pressure, where women feel they must participate in casual encounters to be seen as modern and desirable, even if it goes against their deeper emotional needs. Ultimately, Owens's argument culminates in the idea that this new relational dynamic is unsustainable and unhealthy. She believes that the decline of stable two-parent families is a direct result of these changing norms, and that this decline is at the root of many societal problems. For women, the consequence is not only difficulty in finding a suitable partner, but also the emotional toll of navigating a dating world that she sees as fundamentally misaligned with their psychological well-being. Her proposed solution is a return to more traditional values, where the link between sex, commitment, and family is restored as the central pillar of relational life. In stark opposition to Candace Owens' critique, the mainstream feminist perspective champions the sexual revolution as a monumental and overwhelmingly positive achievement for women. Proponents argue that its primary accomplishment was not promoting casual sex, but rather establishing the principle of choice. Before this era, a woman's life path was largely predetermined by rigid social expectations. The revolution, powered by access to contraception and a changing legal landscape, gave women what they call exponentially more freedom to control their own bodies, their reproductive futures, and the overall trajectory of their lives. This, they contend, is the true meaning of empowerment. Feminist thinkers strongly contest the notion that the revolution devalued women. They make a critical distinction between a woman's intrinsic personal value and her sexual market value. They argue that a woman's worth as a human being is not and should not be tied to her sexual choices. Instead, they assert that the revolution increased women's value by allowing them to be seen as whole individuals, not just as potential wives or mothers. The ability to pursue education, build a career, and contribute to society in diverse ways has elevated women's social and economic standing, which they see as a far more meaningful measure of value. Furthermore, opponents of the Owens narrative argue that happiness is inextricably linked to freedom and autonomy. They point out that the pre-revolutionary era was not a golden age of female contentment for everyone. Many women felt trapped in unhappy or abusive marriages with no viable means of escape. The newfound economic independence and the liberalization of divorce laws provided a crucial exit ramp, allowing women to leave dangerous situations and seek lives that were safer and more fulfilling. From this viewpoint, the ability to choose one's own path, even if it comes with challenges, is preferable to a life of constrained and enforced security. This counter-narrative also emphasizes the broader health and safety benefits that emerged from the era. The open discussion of sexuality led to better sex education, which proponents claim has helped reduce rates of sexually transmitted infections and teenage pregnancies over the long term. While the data on sexual assault is complex, many argue that the feminist movement, which gained momentum during the revolution, was instrumental in raising awareness about rape and domestic violence, leading to stronger laws and support systems for victims. In this light, the revolution was not about devaluing women, but about empowering them to live safer, freer, and more self-directed lives. When we move from passionate arguments to empirical data, the picture of women's well-being since the 1960s becomes more complex and nuanced. One of the most cited pieces of evidence in this debate comes from studies on self-reported happiness. Research using long-term data sets like the U.S. General Social Survey has found a phenomenon sometimes called the paradox of declining female happiness. These studies suggest that since the 1970s, women's self-reported happiness has declined both in absolute terms and relative to men, despite the significant social and economic gains they have made over the same period. This finding appears to lend some support to the claims made by critics like Owens. However, interpreting this data is not straightforward. Scholars have proposed many possible explanations for this trend that do not necessarily support a critique of feminism. One theory is that women's expectations have risen. As more opportunities became available, women may have developed higher standards for their own happiness and life satisfaction, making them more likely to report feelings of discontent if those high expectations are not met. Another possibility is the second shift, where many women who entered the workforce still bear the primary responsibility for housework and childcare, leading to increased stress and burnout. Furthermore, it is important to consider a wider range of indicators for well-being beyond a single happiness question. For example, when looking at life satisfaction on a global scale, the results can be quite different. Data from sources like the World Happiness Report often show that countries with the highest levels of gender equality, particularly the Nordic nations, also report the highest levels of life satisfaction for both men and women. These countries are known for their sexually liberal attitudes and strong social support for working mothers, which challenges the idea that traditional gender roles are a prerequisite for female happiness. Ultimately, the evidence on happiness and life satisfaction is mixed and subject to interpretation. The decline in self-reported happiness in some Western countries is a real and puzzling phenomenon that deserves serious consideration. However, it does not lead to a simple conclusion that the sexual revolution made women less happy. The data is complicated by changing expectations, new social pressures, and different ways of measuring well-being. It suggests that while the freedoms gained were real, they also introduced a new set of complex challenges that society is still learning to navigate effectively. The claims regarding women's mental health and substance use are another critical battleground in the debate over the sexual revolution's legacy. Candace Owens and other critics often point to rising rates of antidepressant use and substance abuse as proof of a decline in female well-being. The data does show that women are more than twice as likely as men to be prescribed antidepressants, and prescription rates have certainly increased over the past few decades. This statistic, on its surface, seems to paint a concerning picture of modern female mental health, providing apparent evidence for the narrative of widespread unhappiness. However, these figures must be analyzed with caution. The increase in antidepressant use can be interpreted in multiple ways. It may reflect a genuine increase in mental distress, but it could also reflect a greater awareness of mental health issues and a reduction in the stigma associated with seeking help. Women in particular are often more likely than men to recognize symptoms of depression and consult a doctor. Therefore, higher prescription rates could be a positive sign that more women are receiving treatment for conditions that went undiagnosed and untreated in previous generations, rather than proof of a new epidemic of sadness. The data on substance abuse is similarly complex. There is evidence that certain forms of substance use, such as binge drinking and the misuse of prescription opioids, have increased among women in recent decades. This is a serious public health concern that cannot be dismissed. However, linking this directly and solely to the sexual revolution is a difficult causal leap to make. These trends have also coincided with major economic shifts, increased academic and professional pressure, and aggressive marketing by pharmaceutical companies, all of which are powerful contributing factors that exist independently of social or sexual norms. Finally, the statistics on suicide rates do not show a simple, continuous increase since the 1960s. According to historical data from the CDC, female suicide rates in the U.S. actually rose in the 1950s and 1960s, then declined steadily through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, before beginning to rise again around 1999. This pattern does not support a straightforward claim that the revolution triggered a steady and ongoing rise in female suicide. Instead, it suggests that suicide rates are influenced by a host of complex factors that change over time, making it simplistic to attribute them to a single social movement from over half a century ago. The debate surrounding the sexual revolution and its impact on women is a powerful reminder that profound social change is rarely a simple story of progress. The era undeniably opened doors for women that had been firmly closed for centuries. It brought forth unprecedented levels of personal autonomy, reproductive choice, and economic opportunity. The ability for a woman to build a career, control her own finances, and decide for herself when and if to have children represents a monumental expansion of human freedom. These gains, championed by feminists, are real, tangible, and have fundamentally reshaped society for the better in many ways. At the same time, the critical perspective voiced by figures like Candace Owens cannot be entirely dismissed. Her arguments tap into a genuine sense of anxiety and dissatisfaction that many women experience today. The challenges of navigating a complex dating culture, the pressures of balancing career and family, and the documented trends in mental health point to real-world problems. The shift away from clear social scripts has left some individuals feeling adrift, struggling to find the stable partnerships and sense of community that are vital for human flourishing. The revolution, in its pursuit of individual liberty, may have underestimated the enduring human need for connection and structure. The evidence itself presents a complicated mosaic rather than a clear verdict. While data on self-reported happiness shows a puzzling decline, other measures of well-being, particularly in gender-equal societies, suggest that freedom and happiness are compatible. Similarly, while statistics on antidepressant use and substance abuse are concerning, they are influenced by numerous factors beyond changing sexual norms, including a greater willingness to seek treatment. The legacy of the revolution is not one of unblemished triumph or unmitigated disaster. It is a story of trade-offs, where new freedoms arrived alongside new and often unforeseen challenges. Ultimately, the most productive path forward is to acknowledge the validity of both narratives. We must celebrate the immense value of the freedoms won while also honestly confronting the social and emotional difficulties that have emerged in their wake. The goal should not be to turn back the clock to a more restrictive era, but to find better ways to support individuals as they navigate the complexities of modern life. Acknowledging that increased liberty comes with increased responsibility for ourselves and for each other is the first step toward building a society that delivers on the promises of both freedom and happiness for all.